There you go.
Right, good evening. I'm Douglas Marshall from the Selkirk Council. I'm the local civil defence controller, joined tonight by Marion Schoenfeld, who's from ECAN. Got a report we're going to present to you. Also with us is Ryan O'Rourke, as the Council's Emergency Management Officer. In the back is Al Wall, who's another one of our Council's civil defence controllers. And Bob, who we've got to. Bob Mumford, Councillor for the Melbourne Ward in the district here. So here tonight to start a process with the Arthur's Pass community, and it's mainly based on obviously the Alpine fault going. So a lot of work being done at the moment, what's called the AF8 project, and what that means when the fault line does go. Whatever percentage you like to calculate, really up to you, but yeah, we're basing on the fact that we'll probably see it maybe in our lifetime, so that's what we're here for. So tonight is very much about, I suppose, a bit of science and a good chance for people like that to sort of kick that round. Over probably the balance of this year, we'll be back talking about the basic reports that we need in the plan. So, in other words, if you're up here and the fault line goes, and we're from Civil Defence down in Rolleston, what are we going to do? What do you know? Do you know what we're going to do if we can't talk to you? Do we know what you're going to do if you're up here and we can't talk to you? Because it obviously could be as bad as that. So tonight's the science, and then we'll get into the balance of it, obviously, over a few minutes. So I'll let Marion do her presentation. Take questions as you go, Marion, be easiest.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Cool. And really the night is yours, so thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming out this cold night. Glad the snow let us here this time. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk to a couple of subjects. The first one is this report that's been released. First of all, apologies it's taken so long to get that out. It actually came into ECAN in August, and by the time we finished reviewing it and we were going to put it on the website, we had a great big earthquake, and it's sort of got put on the back burner. So apologies first of all for the lateness of that. And then I'm going to talk about what you can expect to see in an alpine fault in this sort of alpine fault earthquake in this sort of area. So first of all, before I get into the doom and gloom, I'm going to remind you why you live here. So obviously mountains and bush and beautiful views and fresh air and wildlife, Kias, rivers, ruggedness, weather, snow, and in short, nature. And then there's what you like to do in a monster like that. There's skiing, there's camping, there's climbing and hunting and tramping. The sorts of people who live here, this is what brings you here. This is what you love, and this is what we all love to come on through. Now, if we just take out the nature bit and have a think about what this means though, when you've got mountains mixing it up with weather, you can start to get some other things coming in. So, remember, stunning alpine environment. But once you get those mountains there, you start getting heavy rainfall coming through. And that mixes it up with rivers and ruggedness, and you start getting things like flooding, erosion, aggradation. That's when a whole lot of gravel comes down with the rivers. You get debris flows, you get landslides, and then here the mountains are here because of earthquakes. Earthquakes are pushing the land up, and so you're going to get some of that. And with that can trigger some other things like avalanche rockfall, and they can sometimes fall in across rivers and down rivers. So suddenly the picture looks a little bit different. But right at the front of all that is nature. This is the other side of nature. There's all this beautiful stuff. But when you live up here, you're going to get some of this. And I don't think any of that's a surprise to anybody, really. And then, you know, when nature really gets going, well, it can be quite stunning in a different way. So just a quick overview of the village. Yeah, so basically what we're looking at are steep slopes coming down from all directions, rivers cutting down through. And Some of these may not show up too good, but these are all from the report. There are copies here if you want them. Whoops, back. So what we've got is the village down in here, and you've got all these catchments, weed catchments with streams coming down on steep slopes. And here, these, it gets a bit hard to see, I'm sorry, but each one of these little yellow dots on here is actually where a hazard event has happened. If you look at...
Where what?
Sorry?
Couldn't hear that.
Where a hazard event has happened, whether it's a landslide or a flood or something like that. So what we're looking at is the interaction between perhaps geology and the weather, or the geology and earthquakes, things that are going to trigger. So this is about land stability. And a lot of this, it's all about different ways rocks can drop on you, basically. And we geologists like to put a lot of different terms on things that are slightly different. But the basic geology here, or the geomorphology, actually, the shape of the land, is dictated quite a lot by what's happened with ice. So you've got these ice sculpted bedrock floors. Okay. So they've been smoothed. You might have got growth on top of that, but it might not be holding on very tightly either. And then when you get water going over it, then sometimes it can let go. Whoops. And then there are landslide terrains that we see down through in here as well. And then you've got the rivers with all this gravelly stuff, and that's all actually come down off these hills at some point in some way. Okay? I keep doing that, sorry. That's the bottom after. No, it's not. Right. So what we've got here is just the different sorts of materials that are in place. So down in the bottom, we've got this, we've actually got a glacial terrace. We've got alluvial sediments down through here, so that's stuff that the rivers left behind. So basically, just all you need to know is different sorts of deposits. Some left behind by ice, some left behind by rivers, and some brought down by landslides. So rocks can come down in different ways. The soils can come down in different ways. Rockfall is one of the most common along the road, and what we find is that it's worse on cut slopes, so man-made slopes. You get a lot more rocks dropping off than if you've got the natural slopes. The natural slopes find their own sort of level, and you might get some rocks dropping off, but it tends to, and we call it rockfall if they're kind of one by one, or you can see individual rocks. If they start to come down en masse and all jumbling up and coming down together, that we can call that a rock avalanche. Very similar to a snow avalanche. It's just coming down, and it's pretty dry. It's not got a lot of water in it, but these sorts of things can be huge. And so this is one that came down. I believe it came down in
It's about 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And we believe that is it's earthquake related. Now, when you look at how many faults we've got around and how often they move, there's not many of these there. So that tells you that actually they're not that frequent. Even with a big earthquake, you don't necessarily get these. So although it's a very big hazard and you really don't want that dropping down on the village, we think they're fairly rare. Probably less than one every several thousand years. And given that you've got faults that are kicking off earthquakes on the hundreds of years, or maybe even tens of years time frame, that's really not many of these left in the landscape. So not too much of a worry actually. Bad if they happen, but not that likely to happen. Landslides can happen triggered by rainfall or triggered by earthquakes. So it can just get really, really wet, and sometimes they can just go on their own as well. They can just let go, but that's less common. This is Falling Mountain. There's a picture of it over on the wall over there. But it's just a huge landslide. And this time, it's all kind of coming down, sliding down en masse in one go. It's more soil that's got kind of glued together, and it comes down as one. And then there are debris flows. This one is actually the one that's most common, or most likely in this area. And this is where it has to be very wet, and like sloppy concrete. And these things can actually come down very quickly. And sometimes they can come down and they can actually, where slopes have got vegetation on them, sometimes that holds them together, but actually sometimes the vegetation can just become entrenched in the debris flow, and it can actually make it bigger and more damaging, I guess. And then of course all this material gets into the rivers. The rivers, you know, even if they're not dammed, you know, you might get the bridges, the gravel growing up under the bridges, and then you can get blockages if you don't keep that in order. So here, these are the slopes around the place, and you can see some of them have got this loose stuff on, so I mean, they could give you a rock avalanche. Other places you can see little landslide scarps in there, and in places you can actually see differences in vegetation, and that might be a bit of land that's moved, and then the vegetation might die out somewhat, and then you'll get a different type of plant growing there. It's not always, but sometimes that's a bit of a giveaway for that. So all of these things have got potential for debris flow, landslide, rockfall, rock avalanche. Now this report doesn't actually give a specific hazard map saying, you know, this is this particular rockfall here, rock avalanche there, whatever. Actually, many of these things could form in many of these places. The whole village really is a little bit susceptible to this stuff. So that's kind of known. There's no real surprises in this. This can be. This is actually highlighted as one of the most likely and most troublesome things that you have to deal with, and that's when your river comes into flood. You might have got old landslide stuff washed in there. Then you get this aggregation. You get a huge amount of gravel brought down, and then if it gets stuck under your bridges, that clogs it up, makes it more susceptible to flooding. Heavy rainfall. Here's some historical pictures here of the river in real state and the mess it leaves behind. So this is more the aggregation sort of stuff, but then you can also get erosion, gouge out, and that can cause trouble with your infrastructure as well, flooding. And then if you don't clear this up, it leaves you in a worse state for next time. And again, same sort of thing, infrastructure and erosion. And this is all those things we talked about. And, yeah. That's kind of the most likely thing. This of course was the tragic debris flow where there was some lads camping and they got taken out. Had they been in a house, they may well have survived it, but they weren't. They were camping. So this is one of the issues that you have to deal with. And these things can actually move quite fast. And they don't just flow like water, they flow more like concrete, like wet concrete, which means that even if you've got a bund, sometimes they can get up and over that. So they are a little bit of a worry, but it's very difficult to pin down where it would happen, but it's one of the things that you have in this sort of environment. But don't forget, mountains and bush, and this is why you're here. And this is all this stuff is just what comes with the territory. Nature. It's nature. And all the things that you can do in there. So it's easy in talks like this to get focused on all the negatives, but you need to remember why you're here. And do what you can and I'll talk a bit more at the end about what can be done to sort of manage some of this. So that's what's in that report. It basically spells out all these hazards, which are all different ways rocks can drop on you, basically, and you know, dropping in your river and flooding rivers and that sort of thing. So now are there any questions on that before I go on? Some of it's a little bit semantics for ordinary people. It's just like whether it comes down in a landslide or whether it comes down in a debris flow or a rock avalanche. It still blocks your road, you know, or it hurts if it lands on you, whatever.
We're going to talk a bit later about, you know, methods of trying to stop some of the outflows and aggradation.
Yeah,
we put the wall up on the Beatty River, but what are the changes that causes by putting?
Yeah. Some of that is will need to be monitored ongoing. I'll go through the recommendations from the report at the end, but yeah, and it is after floods, just make sure you clear it out, and if they
Mary, could you get a Mount Adams here?
sorry,
Near the Mount Adams rock avalanche on the coast.
I don't know that one.
It just came out of the blue.
You can in any of these environments you can.
It blocked the river, didn't it block the...
Well,
Yeah, that's
it took out, it completely inundated one farm, and all the material has been gradually washing down. Down the, what river is it?
Yeah, it's Power River, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the west coast is more susceptible because it's wetter. That constant rainfall, they get, do they get more rainfall than here?
Deteriorates.
Yes, and so that is one of the reasons, and that also means that they're eroding faster. And so there's a lot more material there, and then it gets wetter, so it is more susceptible there. But you could actually get some of that here. Yeah. So if we're thinking about, if we go on to think about earthquakes more specifically, a lot of these things can be triggered by earthquakes. It's just one of the things that happens with earthquakes. So why do we get them, first of all? Well, actually we're in a pretty busy place in the world. So we're on the Pacific Rim, and this feature that runs through here is actually a plate boundary. So the top, 15 kilometres of the Earth's crust actually moves around. And it moves around in what we call plates. And so the plates vary in size, but as they move around, sometimes they're moving away from each other and opening up and growing. In some places, they're moving alongside each other, and in other places, they're coming and they crash, and they'll either go up like that, but more commonly, one plate will dive down under the other. Now, as it goes, it might stick, and then eventually it'll give up, bang, and that's your earthquake. And if that happens under the sea, that's when you get tsunami. But I want to point out, so in New Zealand, we've got this subduction zone down through here, where this plate, the Pacific plate, is going down underneath the North Island. Down here, we've got the opposite direction. So here, the Australian plate is coming down under the Pacific plate. And both of those are a bit dodgy in terms of tsunami. In between, you've got this twist. So you've got this going down here, you've got this going down here, and in between it's sort of a twist, and that's the Alpine Fault, okay, so which runs down through here. I've got a better picture of that in a minute. But I just want to point out, before I start, this is New Zealand. Well, it's actually Zealandia. Look how big it is. It's about half as big as Australia. But there's only this bit sticking out above the water. And there's two reasons why. In the North Island, it's volcanoes. And in the South Island, it's earthquakes, faults. We are being pushed up. So we are going to get earthquakes. It is why we are here as a nation. And we owe our whole existence to it. So that just gives you a little bit, it's that nature thing again. So that's a little bit better picture. And that shows you actually where the fault goes. So this is Selwyn District here. And you can see that as you get to the edge of it, we nearly get the Alpine Fault coming through the district, but it's just outside. Okay. So we're pretty close. So just a word about faulting. Just as the plate boundaries move in different ways, on a smaller scale, these faults, so the alpine fault is actually on the plate boundary. That represents this bit is separate from this bit, and this is where it's crashing together. But you can also have smaller scale faults as well, and they move in similar ways. Sometimes one bit goes above the other, that's called a thrust or reverse fault. Sometimes the top bit drops down, and that it's sort of the whole thing lengthens, and they're called normal faults. And sometimes they move side by side, side to side like that. And that's a strike slip fault. That's just a bit of terminology. Sometimes they get as far as breaking through the surface, and you'll get an actual scarp there. Sometimes they won't quite break through the surface, and you'll just get folding at the surface, either as a monocline, where the dip is all in one direction, or as an anticline, where it dips that way there and that way there. And that's just terminology, doesn't really matter. But you can see that if you build your house on one of these things and it moves, yeah, it's not necessarily the best thing. And if you build it on a normal or reverse fault, you'll find yourself on a slope, your house might fall down. If you're on a strike slip fault, your house might be sliced in two. Having said that, I mean, there were some places on the Greendale fault where the fault came in one side, out the other. The house was still standing. Just went in one door and out the other, and no, the house was actually no more damaged than some were by liquefaction. So if you look at the smaller scale faults, there's actually quite a lot in Selborne. Well, there are right through Canterbury, except for Christchurch City. The only one of our 10 districts that hasn't got any of these on a map is Christchurch City. And that's ironic. It just means that all of this, you can't put it on a map because it doesn't get as far as the surface, that all theirs are buried. So you can see, so Arthur's Pass is, where is it? Is that it? Can't read it. I think is that it up there? Here. And so you can see that there are quite a few of these faults, and they move different amounts, different times. Some of them move every few hundred years, some every few thousand, some tens of thousands. But each one of those, the closer you are to them, the more you'll feel the ground shake when they go. And then of course there's the Alpine fault just off out of the district as well. So when an earthquake happens, there are a number of things that go with it. There's fault rupture of the ground surface, I just talked about that. Ground shaking is the thing that is most widespread. That's what most people experience in an earthquake. And that's what shakes houses to pieces and that sort of thing. Liquefaction. Now that's where you've got soft and unconsolidated sediments, very fine and wet. And they basically, once they're shaken up, they start to behave like a liquid. And then you get, silt carried out of the ground, squirted out of the ground. The ground turns to jelly, essentially. Land instability, that's the sort of things I've just been talking about, rockfall and rock avalanche and landslides. And then you can get cascading hazards. So this is where all this stuff affects other things. So like when you get landslides blocking rivers, and then when the dam breaches, then you get a flood downstream. Strike slip faulting. So here's an old one. I think this was the Hope fault. And you can see this used to be in a straight line, and it's been offset by that amount. This one's the Greendale fault, pretty much similar. Yeah. And actually, the Greendale fault, most of what we saw, the offsets on the roads, fences, power lines, if those things hadn't been there, then it would have been very difficult to see where the fault was after a little while. You can see the cracks on the ground, but they get lost very quickly. Plough the field and it's gone. That's particularly with strike slip faults because they've not got that scar. And this is I think that one there is one from Japan. This is one of the latest faults that have arrived in Kaikoura district. Okay, I think it's the Kekanengu fault. And there's some people. So there's actually quite an offset here. Some of these faults have moved 9-10 metres in this earthquake. It's quite phenomenal. And again, you can see where these faults go through. just from how they offset what we've put there. I would say that the ground, when the ground gets cut, that's actually kind of in a way the least of your hazards in all this, because it affects a very, very narrow band, and you have to be unlucky to be actually built on one of those. So when you see those red lines on a map, it can be all, oh man, but actually that's the least of it. The ground shaking is the one that affects everybody. Liquefaction in some areas, if they've got the right sort of ground. Ground shaking. Now, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, we in Canterbury did a civil defence exercise, and it was called Ripper-Rapper, I think. It was an alpine fault scenario, and we got somebody to actually put together the scenario, a realistic scenario of what we could expect if an alpine fault happened, earthquake happened. And this was the ground shaking map here. Okay. Now, the scenario had a magnitude 8 on the Richter scale. Now that's hard to sort of quantify in terms of what it means for people, because it depends how far away you are. So we use this modified Macaulay scale, okay, which I'll put up in a minute to show you how that scale works. It's a bit more like the Beaufort scale. You know, it's a 1 if you can see the socks hanging down, wind socks hanging down, and if you can see the smoke going in a different direction, it's a 4 or whatever. It's just an observational scale. You can see that in here it says the maximum is 10, so that's 10, and you guys are probably on the edge of 10 or 9 down through here. So that's the level of ground shaking with this alpine fault earthquake you could expect. You probably can't read that, but it goes from barely sensed by very few people and goes through felt indoors as a light vibration and so forth. By the time you get to 9 and 10, it's called destructive. So we've gone from imperceptible, scarcely felt, weak, largely observed, strong, slightly damaging, heavily damaging. We're into destructive around here. Okay. Alarm may approach panic. A few buildings are damaged, and some weak buildings are destroyed. And here we've got some buildings are damaged, many big weak buildings destroyed, and then the 10 is very destructive, many buildings damaged, most weak buildings are destroyed. Now, in New Zealand, we build according to what our seismic hazard is, and we have what we call a Z factor, and it just reflects how strong an earthquake you think you could get. Now, the highest Z factor in New Zealand is 0.6, which is actually Otira on this pass. So you're pretty close to the strongest shaking that you can expect here. But what that means is the buildings here have to be built stronger, because this is a factor that engineers take into the reckoning when they're building. So although you're going to get high shaking, your building should be built a little bit stronger, certainly modern buildings. Now, this is what ground shaking does to unreinforced masonry building. Have you got much of this here? I don't really know. No. So, single-story wooden houses actually stand up pretty well to shaking. But yeah, that's the sort of thing that you get with ground shaking.
This building we're at the moment is probably the most prone to it.
That's the only one.
Yeah, they're much more about the wall. What about chimneys? What about chimneys up here? Are the masonry chimneys or
Yeah,
the
chimneys is one
knocked
thing.
down on the anyone thought they said it knocked down on 1994.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to know.
So in this scenario, and I think with this scenario, the fault started here and went north and south, which means with an alpine fault earthquake, if it's a magnitude 8, you can expect about 4 minutes of shaking. If it starts at one end, if it starts in the middle and goes both directions, it doesn't shake for as long as if it starts here and has to travel all this way. So it could be 4 minutes, could be 6 minutes, and that's long. The Kaikoura quake was just over 2, and yeah, This is quite a long one. I looked at my watch and it was 2 minutes after I started timing. And I was like, oh, better get out to bed, you know. But yeah. Now, if in this scenario, the scientist who put this together, he looked at how many fatalities as a direct result of the shaking. So this is dying in buildings, mostly. There might be some people who are dying on the road, a rock coming down or whatever. And you can see that here on the west coast, you've got really big figures for this. And although some of that is actually, because of the shaking, you can get landslides down in Milford, and that can cause tsunami. Okay, so some of those deaths on the west coast are with tsunami, but it's all because of the earthquake. You can see that Selwyn was modelled as having 7 for the whole district. So you can expect some fatalities. Injuries, here again, massive injuries, 73 injuries. Yeah. And this town may be susceptible, it's closer, it's going to feel more shaking. But your buildings, you know, you shake quite regularly here, and so hopefully that's balanced out a bit. Notice though that if you look at the percentage due to the earthquake and the percentage due to tsunamis, the number of fatalities is actually quite similar. The number of injuries is very, very, very different. What that tells you is that if you get caught in a tsunami, you're more likely to die than get injured. If you get caught in an earthquake, you're more likely to get injured than to die. Okay. So that tsunami's really taken up, it's really increased the number of fatalities in here. Not something to worry about here. Liquefaction. In order to get liquefaction, you have to have ground shaking. It only happens in an earthquake, and the soil has to be loose, it has to be sandy or silty, and it has to be wet. You've actually not got that many of these sorts of soils here. You've got a lot of gravel, you've got a lot of coarser stuff. And so it's unlikely to be much of an issue. It will only be in little patches. You're not going to see anything like you saw in Christchurch. And lateral spread. When the ground turns to liquid, if there's a free surface, so if there's like a riverbank or something, then this will all just flow towards it. That's what we call lateral spread. But you only get this if the ground's liquefied. So again, it's not likely to be much of an issue. You could get a little bit around the edge of the river, but yeah. And that's pretty cool. I used to live just next door to that bridge, so. But this is the sort of thing that it's a real force. This is nature again. That lateral spread is narrowing the river, and it's actually just mangling the iron bridge there. So, geomorphic hazards. So, what can we expect to happen in the landscape when this comes through? This is not very clear, but basically, down in through here, you've got landslides, you've got landslide downs, you've got debris flows, all of those things down through here. And you can expect the road to be blocked. This is the sort of thing we saw in Christchurch, rocks going through houses, rocks coming down on roads, all that sort of thing. You can expect to see some of this. And in Kaikoura, it was very extensive. But that was, in the 7s, approaching 8, but initial estimates of 80 to 100,000 landslides triggered. And that's biggish landslides. And about 158 landslide downs. And that's quite important. And the damage, this was if you look at a map of the damaged area in the Christchurch quake in 2011, you put your little finger over Christchurch, that was the area that was damaged. With this one, it will be a palm. That's the sort of size and scale difference. And with an alpine, and it's a logarithmic scale. So going from a magnitude 1 in the 6s to 1 in the 7s is that, and if you go up into magnitude 8, you've got a much bigger area again. And it would be more concentrated near where the fault itself is. And these are the sorts of landslides we saw. It depends on what your geology is, to some degree. and it also depends on how close you are to a fault. So if you look at this landslide here, these little dots in here are trees. This is just enormous, and all of this stuff here has come down from leaving this scarp here. This is actually a fault running through here, and in this case it's not just the fault movement, it's actually the top slid off it as well. And again, just huge scale. So I think this one is actually the one where you saw the pictures of the cows that got stranded. And they did get out the farm. The farmer actually walked up and led them down. So, yeah, just huge, just mind-blowing the size of some of these things. So, yeah. And one of the things we have to deal with is where the house might be perfectly intact, but you might have landslides in behind. This is a landslide just waiting to come down onto here. And so one of the jobs that civil defence has to do is go out and check buildings, not only for the structural safety, but also to see if they're geotechnically safe. Now this one's a bit of an issue. This is getting down to the nitty-gritty now. For you people, this is the state highways that you could expect to be closed. Not only this one, but you know, all these roads across here. The west coast is going to be pretty much cut off. What that means for this village is that you could well be isolated. But it's not just you that's isolated. It's a whole lot of people right the way through here. Which means that the resources are going to be very thinly spread. So you've got to bear in mind that it might take time to get the resources to get you out. Okay? And that's why Ryan's going to work with you to get around what you're going to do in the days before they get you out. In Kaikoura, it was quite a long time. And of course, it depends on the season as well, and how many tourists you've got in town and those sorts of things. Ports, airports, railways, the railways out, and some of the ports are okay and some of them aren't. Again, it's the west coast that's a bit hammered. And all that's got implications about how easy it is to get resources in and people out. The hydropower network, that's what the network looks like now, and that would be in the dark. And some of this through here might still be intact, but that's got implications. You guys are in the dark here. How long before cell phone reception is lost if power is out South Island wide? Well, you're in the bit that's got about 4 hours. So you need to think about how you're going to manage that. And landslide dams. This is an old landslide dam, Kaikoura. This is where all the landslide dams were. And in some parts, sometimes they were upstream of a village. Sometimes they were upstream of the state highway. There were over 100 of them, 150 of them. But there are only about 6 that were troublesome. And actually, most of them have gone now. There's only one that remains that's troublesome. The rest in Cyclone Cook washed themselves out. And that's what usually happens. And some of these, again, are just huge landslides that just block the river. This Harpuku one is actually 100 metres high. But what's happened, this is the one that's left that's troublesome, but what's happened is the water's actually now gone through. The water got to the top, and it's overtopped, and it's cutting down. So there's so much material there that it's not going to fail catastrophically. It's just going to cut its way down. Yeah, just hundreds and hundreds of tons of material there. And what happens when you get these dams? Yes, if they breach all at once, then you can get a real flood coming downstream. But actually, ongoing, Kaikoura and Hurunui are dealing with choking of rivers. So it's water quality that goes down if you've got silty sediments in there. And then you get aggradation. You've got this masses more gravel coming down into the river. And that causes ongoing flood issues. The river gets filled up, it just can't carry as much water. And sometimes you get avulsion. This can happen as well in Clarence. This has happened because the Kekarengu faulters, there's actually been 10 metres of uplift in places. And the river just doesn't want to follow the same path anymore. And so it jumps out, and then it's an issue because it's going where it didn't used to and stuff. And then it may not be the end of it, because there's a lot of loose material left up there that will get washed down one way or another, and it could be with a big landslide. And if you've got a dam sitting there, you get another landslide in, then you can get overtopping even if the dam stays in place. So this is recommendations, and I just put this up as a prompt. So first of all, these are the recommendations out of that report there of what can be done to sort of, help mitigate some of this. And remember, some of these things would be triggered by earthquakes, so it does relate, and some of them just by flooding. So basically, the redistribution earthworks, so where you've got the flood stuff where they're digging out the river and just keeping it clear, that needs to continue. That's good. That was a tip. So the hazard from debris flow is mitigated considerably while that's in place. Keep doing what you're doing. Culverts and drainage courses, they need to be regularly inspected and maintained. If you get a big event, we need to have another look at the hazard profile, because it changes, and there may be houses that are under threat. It's basically just monitoring what the situation is. Consideration should be given to the benefit of retaining earth-moving equipment in Arthur's Cast Village, especially if you're going to be cut off at some point. And if you can have that there, then you can deal with it quickly rather than having to try and get the equipment in. A lot of these are for council, not so much for individuals. That's about modelling, but again, this could happen anyway. You've got to be ready anywhere. Mapping what we've already got. Just bearing in mind the assumptions. But this is one that you might deal with, Ryan, with, and this is permanent residents, weekly estimated visitors, and this sort of thing. It actually helps planning to know some of those numbers, or to have a good guess at some of those numbers. So these are the recommendations that came out in the report. It's basically keep on maintaining, and if you get things like, if the railway ever stopped going through, the Kiwi Rail would not then necessarily be doing some of the works to keep the bridges clear. And so some of that, council needs to bear in mind some of those things. So these are some of the recommendations that have come through.
Can I ask what the sort of status of those recommendations is now? Where do they sit?
Well, we haven't actually talked through that yet. This report's just been presented to Selwyn, and we'll be over to the council to decide what they do with that. They've only just received this report, even though it says...
Because your second recommendation talked about maintaining drains.
Yes.
And like many people, we've got a drain between our property and John Nash next door. It's been there 25 years. Mm-hmm. And last year, for the first time ever, my garage flooded. Probably because that drain wasn't cleared. It wasn't earthquake related,
Right.
And
it just clogged up with,
And I mean, sort of how, if this is a known issue which you have identified, and obviously we can identify too, how does that sort of get pushed to become the agenda item to someone?
Well, that would be more a question for you. So that will be something that Selwyn District had. We've given the report, and we will work alongside Selwyn to do our bit, but there will be bits that just fall to them. It'll be over to them what they do with that. In terms of earthquake in general, well, there's what you can do personally, and when you feel the earthquake in the first place, drop, cover, hold. Drop, get to the floor, cover your head, get under something if you can, and then hold on to that something so that it doesn't get away from you. But before you get there, these things are really good, and there's some really good resources on this site here. And if you just Google "get ready, get through," then this site comes up. So this is where you're going to be, who work out what your plan is, where you're going to meet, how you're going to get in touch, especially if cell phones are down. And then the things that you need to get together. So your household items, your emergency, what you're going to need if you're going to stay there. And this says three days food and water. I suggest you might like a bit more than that here. You might like a week or more. So just because, realistically, when that fault goes there, there are going to be a lot of people right the way through the South Island who need getting out, and you may not be first on the list. That's just how it is. And then, yeah, there are a whole lot of tips on there that you can do. So this is what you can do personally. And then as a community, Ryan and his team are going to be working with you to get a community response plan together. So that'll come a bit later. Okay? And just to finish, just remember where you are and enjoy, because it's like crossing the road. You know, you can do things to make sure that you can do it more safely than others, and don't sweat it. Just do what you can is the thing. And thank you. And if there are any more questions, then go for it.
No, could you, I'd like to get back to that question. Mine is around, it's about flooding and hydrological sort of control, and with the work you've done with the council to try and protect the village from flooding, but it's the future hydrology in place that we need to know a bit more about. If we do one thing, it affects the other thing. So where do we get that advice?
I'm not sure what ECAN has planned, but that sort of modelling tends to sit more with our flood modellers than with others. But here, there are so many variables that it's actually difficult to get anything meaningful, because you only need one more debris flow come down and it's all changed again. And the terrain's steep, this sort of stuff's happening all the time. So, I mean, the roads, the way the state highway is managed is, well, every now and then they clear up the mess, because you can't actually manage everything. But those works will have gone in with some thought, and then it is maintaining that waterway, just making sure that when there is an event, it gets cleared out properly and whatever. And I think again it will sit with our river engineers, it will sit with some of the district. So, yeah.
Seems to me one of the things that was in common between the Christchurch earthquake and the Kaikoura earthquake is that afterwards geotechnical scientists were saying, oh, we didn't expect this. And then it seems to me it's a little dangerous if you say, okay, hanging things on a specific scenario, because what is common to those two is that you have the unexpected. So an emphasis on the unexpected is probably a good thing.
Yeah, well that's right, but for both of those, all those individual features that are named there happened.
But
I actually think that it was more of a surprise to the public than it was to the scientists. For starters, like liquefaction, for example.
Oh, that was well mapped.
That was well mapped, it was well known, it was well understood, but it hadn't been pushed out to the public what that actually looked like when it happened. And so for the public that was a shock, that was a new experience for them. The size of the shaking was unexpected for that area, because there's no mapped faults there. Like I say, Christchurch City is the one that doesn't have any mapped faults at all, because they're all buried. But my predecessor used to, she worked for ECAN and then she worked for Wellington and she worked for ECAN again. When she was in Wellington, someone was telling me, Helen Grant as she was then, she used to say that Christchurch is going to get it before Wellington. So, it's well known, but I mean, whether you get the Alpine fault comes in at one end and going all the way, or in the middle, all of those things you can expect. The details of it are going to be slightly different, but roads are going to be blocked, and most of the passes, if not all of them, are going to be blocked. Exactly where, we don't know. Ground shaking is going to be very intense close to that fault, and it'll get less further away. We're starting to see some simulations of how that's going to affect other parts, so Christchurch is actually going to shake for longer than we thought, and those sorts of things. We don't know exactly where the landslide dams will be, but we really know there are going to be some. So the thing is, you don't know the exact details, And it might be magnitude 9, but that just means more of the same. And it means, what do we go and look for? Well, what we need to know is what next. So we need to go and look for the things that are going to have ongoing effects. We need to find out where there are landslides that are going to affect buildings with people in them. Because what's happened, but more can happen yet. And it's the more that can happen yet that you can actually do something about. Get the people out of that building. Find out where the rivers are dammed. And if it's dammed, is it a dam that's this big with this much water behind it, or is it a dam with this much rock and this much water behind it? Because they're quite different scenarios. What's downstream? Is there other people downstream? Is there, you know, if it's just out in the Watts and that's not going to affect anybody, don't worry about that one. But get the people out if you need to down here. So, yeah, I mean, I take what you're saying. But yes, don't just go with what you expect, but actually you need to work with what you do know as well. And all of that we do know, that we can expect some of all this. And there may be more on top that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So we just have to work with what we do know. So, yeah.
You know, is there any evidence in the Beatty Valley currently of previous landslide dams?
I don't think there is actually. I mean, it would be a similar. There's no lakes. You know, that's the thing about Kaikoura. We've got all these landslide dams, and that place shakes quite often. The Hope Fault goes up through there that goes off every 300 years, and there are no lakes that pre-exist up there. So, what happens? I mean, they almost certainly do get these dams, but they wash out all by themselves.
Yeah. There has been one, not in the Beatty Valley, but in the Aotearoa Valley.
Oh, is that? Okay.
So that slide you showed of the slip above with the Aotearoa Viaduct.
Oh, yeah.
If you go, I won't go back to it, but if you look at that picture holistically, the Hills Peak slide came right down, filled the Aotearoa Valley,
Yeah.
and over time has eroded
Yeah.
and caused that oversteeping bit,
Okay.
which is beside the Aotearoa Viaduct, right? So that Digley Flat, all of that area will have been a lake at some point,
Okay.
and it's come down. So because that slip came right down the bend, the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about what the actual risk of that is and that that's what.
Yeah, no, it would be a definite risk. Where you've got steep slopes and the river, it would be a definite risk. But what the point I was trying to make there was just because there's nothing remaining there now doesn't mean they've not been there before.
So you wouldn't necessarily see evidence of it previously?
Well, it sounds like there is some remnant evidence there,
Yeah.
but not necessarily. Just depends on how it washes out.
I was hearing an argument between some people earlier this year, in fact, as to the extent to which landslide dams actually wash out rapidly or whether they gradually come out. One person saying, I've spent my life fixing roads on the west coast and there's never been one which has come down quickly.
Yeah.
But somebody else said, all right, it's back of Seddonville in Mikanui, there was one which flooded Seddonville quickly.
It depends very much on the rock type. You know, if you've got huge, great big boulders involved in the dam, then that tends to hold it together a bit better. If it's just silt, it washes out more easily and maybe all in a hurry. But it also depends very much how big it is. If it's tall and skinny, if that's what your landslide gives you, then that's much more susceptible to washing out catastrophically than if you've got a huge mass of rock and soil with a bit of water behind it. It depends on those sorts of proportions, and it also depends on what's downstream as to how bad that is, because if you've got a broadening out valley and you get this water washing down, you've got plenty of space for it to go. Whereas if you've got a narrow valley and a village sitting here, then that could be a bit more catastrophic again. So you can't predict easily. And in fact, what we're doing now, when we had, like above Goose Bay, we had a landslide down. We got some modelling done, some hydrodynamic modelling of how that, okay, so if that just fell down, just take the dam out, what would happen to the water? And we modelled that to see whether we needed to evacuate the village or what we needed to do. But then after it's washed out, the scientists have gone back and picked up the trash line of where the water actually went. And they're using that to back model what actually happened, how that failed. So we're actually teaching the models to get intelligent. So hopefully we'll have a bit better guess at that next time we have to deal with that. So.
With some friends in Scargill, and they had a log burner that moved 1.5 meters into their lounge and was unusable following an aftershock in Kaikoura. And I think a lot of us have log burners up here perhaps and had thought that might be a backup without power and that. Is that common for log burners to Steve?
I've not really heard much of that, but yeah, is there something you can do to tie that back? Because it's like your bookshelves.
I don't know the details, I know that they seem to just shifted.
But even a flue failing just means your whole house fills with smoke, so you've still got that issue even if you're not burning.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, people can assume that without power, okay, you've got a log burner, there's some heating and maybe cooking, but that may not be the case at
Well,
all.
that's right. You just don't know. So maybe you know, a gas stove or a paraffin stove or something there as well, just in case as well. But on the day, you just don't know quite which way it's going to fall.
Can I ask another?
Sure.
I just wondered if there was a communication plan for an AFA
Well, that's-
here in Arthur's Pass, because, you know, fibre is going to be out,
Yeah.
cell phones going to be out, and people really need to know very rapidly what to do and what's happening, you know, the wider context.
That's the
Is there a
sort of
plan?
thing that Ryan will be working on. But South Island wide, that AFA project that is being run out of the Ministry of Civil Defence, that is a kind of a South Island wide plan is going to be developed out of that. But within that, you will also need your local plan, and the local civil defence guys will be working with the local community to develop some of that.
You don't rely on Chris otherwise.
Uh-huh.
Well, the local network
So, I mean, one of the things coming out of the next stage will be putting some money aside annually to cover a number of the issues, like the argument say the drainage, one thing we'll pick up on. We have a satellite phone sitting with the fire department, so that's one community. Although I must admit, there's one thing that was pointed out to me recently that there's only so much satellite phone bandwidth actually available anyway, so I would have thought it was a given that you get a call out.
Well, depends where the satellites are, here in Narrow Valley.
Yeah. Issues such as, I mean, we obviously, the response to up here is an idea of generator, that type of thing. So we need to understand that stuff that keeps people alive for the next period. One of the things we need to understand better though is that whole tourist circuit and how many people like to be on the road. At Castle Hill we've just put a 20 kilowatt, the 20? Yeah, we've just put a bigger generator at the Castle Hill Residence Community Centre there, and that's to try and give us a welfare point on the road that, you know, we've got something there. So it's a plan for Arthur's Pass, it's a plan for Castle Hall and Lake Coleridge, but also tying those communities together so we understand on the day what will happen. And you're right, we can't second guess everything, but we've got to do something more than what we have now. The AFA project is massive for civil defence in South Island because it gives us that, you know, the key data that we can then leverage all. So it will take us a number of months, and really key to it is your views on how it will work, because ultimately you're the community up here being shaken and tossed around, so we need to understand how we best support you. And so there'll be those hard decisions to make. I mean, I was pleased that Nick said most of the masonry come down in 94. That's good.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of stuff we need to understand so that we know what the potential risks are, so that if time, you know, populating stoves in is sensible, then we work out, notice how, we'll probably notice how that works. So I suppose the thing we will look to work with the community response team members up here and look to work with obviously Fire and Emergency New Zealand, Arthur's Pass, and obviously with DOC, because they're the key partners for us up here. But we clearly want to tie back into the association and work on that too. So we're going to be debating and discussing for a wee while. We are lucky that Outback here did a lot of work in the Kaikoura earthquake as a controller, and Goose Bay, you were involved in that plan, weren't you? When that dam established itself. So we do have a lot of experience as a community we can draw on. So it's just a matter. It's one of those things you can sit and worry about it, but actually you've got to do something, and we need to lead that through for you. So, is there anything particular on you want to add a few comments?
I just want to add a little bit to what Marion said about sort of the isolation for you guys, because you are likely to be isolated for quite some time.
Hopefully.
Yeah. No one from the council will be able to get here. So yeah, no one will be able to drive here. You won't be able to drive out. We may not be able to fly here depending on what the weather's like, and that could go on for a period of days. And helicopters will be a critical resource. Even if you wanted to get out, you won't be able to hire a helicopter yourselves because they'll all be commandeered by civil defence. So the reality is you're on your own, and whatever injuries you've got in this community, you might be managing them yourselves for weeks. If you've got fatalities, which is a possibility, you might be dealing with that for a couple of weeks as well. In terms of information, the satellite phone mail may not work, but other than that, we may not be able to get you any information at all. And so,
do we have an estimate of whether the landlines would survive in an 8 or thereabouts?
Probably not. I mean, they'd probably be down along the power. Although I do recommend that you do have a non-wireless phone as well, because they don't rely on power. So if the power's down, you can still use those ones. But
yeah, our system does rely on power, but we have a way of generating that as well.
Do you have a generator?
Yeah, we do. And one we can put into it.
so we'll get here as quick as we can, but it might be quite some time. But in the meantime, what you guys can do is what Marianne was talking about, by having your own emergency kits, having a bit of a plan about what you might do, and having a good stock of supplies. And even up here, I'd go so far as to say things like storing your photographs and important documents in the cloud. Because if you're a permanent resident here, you might be leaving on a helicopter and not coming back. Because the shaking's not just going to be one big earthquake and that's it. If it's a magnitude 8, there's going to be a whole lot of magnitude 7 aftershocks. And the shaking, this place is going to be quite unstable for quite a long period of time.
that also makes clearing the road very difficult. If you're clearing the road from where there's debris all down the slope, and you've got magnitude 7 aftershocks going,
Yep. So we've got to think about the big picture and having an emergency kit and your key stuff that you might take with you because you may not be coming back.
But with that emergency kit, you just said you installed a 20 kilowatt generator at Castle Hill. Is there any plan to put a smaller type system in Arthur's Pass?
We've given the Fire Force a generator, but I think it might be a little bit different here, I suppose, with the steep slopes around and not knowing which buildings are potentially going to survive and which buildings. So if we had it tied to a particular building, that building might be unusable afterwards. So these are things that we can discuss definitely down the track. But yeah.
I think the key challenge for us is to make sure we get some money inside in council's budget to do stuff in our plans as we go through the district. And so do our bit up here. Like, one of the key things that I think is that travelling public, because it's one thing to have a kit for every family up here, but if there's 1,000 people on the road, there's 1,000 mouths we've got to feed for 2 or 3 days, and
So they're going to be our first priority probably with the plans. Those motorists are stuck on the road between 2 bridges that are out or a landslide, and they've got nothing other than what they're wearing, possibly no food and cool water in the car. If it's winter, we've got to look at all the ski fields and resorts and so on.
I was fascinated to hear Castle Hill say the other day that they actually have a stockpile of food for, not for themselves, but for people who they deployed that, for people who got stuck in the snow the other day. That was something I hadn't kind of thought of. Well, I thought of it, but I hadn't kind of actually done anything about it.
No, we one day we just kept around at the number of potential skiers up here, and the number got a bit high, so we stopped looking at it. But we actually have to go back and understand that, because they're big numbers, and we just need to figure out, because it's not to some degree what we can do with it, it'll be the information we feed into the centralised system to say, so people can go, gee, but Selma, we've got a bigger problem than everybody else, we've got to prioritise that for the moment. It's that type of information we've got to try and get our head around and get some what Ron calls swags, which are scientific wild ass guesses, but try and get it a wee bit more defined. But yeah.
Sorry, no. But that's the other thing, when you're looking at the whole big picture as well, the West Coast is going to be the worst affected area, so the national attention is going to be on the West Coast. International help, which we're going to require, is probably going to go to the West Coast first. So resources are going to be a real issue. They're talking about the South Island economy being dominated by recovery for 10 years after this event, so it's significant. So, but I think it's going to take us months to get this plan in place, but you can take some steps as individuals and families in the interim just to make sure you're a little bit better organised until we get the community plan in place. Sorry to be the doom and gloom bringers, but I think it's important to be honest when we're looking at these things and not to try and gloss things over, especially given what we know after the recent events.
Well, as Mary said, the key thing is scratch place to live, you know, that's why happening. So we take the negative and the positive, but yeah, we just got to be prudent. That's what we are in civil defence obligated, actually legislated to do. So yeah, it's we're actually genuinely looking forward to the next 6 to 9 months to bring a plan and then see it implemented over the next few while. So glad so many of you. We're glad we chose a Friday night. We were going to come in a Wednesday night initially, but Friday night seemed good. We got contacted about that, so glad it's worked for those of you here. Glad those of you are going to see this video enjoy. But we'll be back and welcome you.
Hey, can I ask another question?
Okay.
It's this that pretty well everything you said is focused on an alpine fall event, which is what, 150, 160 per year. But there's an awful lot of other things that can happen, which may be smaller and more localised and so on. Are you looking at those, or are you just forgetting about those and just looking at the one big thing?
If you plan for the big one, the small one's going to be easier to manage than that. If you just get a local earthquake, you're not going to have South Island wide issues. The resources are going to be concentrated in here. So the plans that you put in place for the big one will apply just as much in the small one. You just might not need it quite so much.
No, local planning is included things like train crashes and we have done civil defence planning here for many years, for many different kinds of and varieties. And it's got train crashes, it's got floods, and all sorts of stuff that we've sat and thought about.
Yeah, some of those things have happened. The railway's been cut off for whatever reason, the road's been cut off or slip on the west coast.
So, I mean, when you be here for the 94 quake? No. Yeah? Well, what was that like? Was it like vicious?
Wasn't as bad as Christchurch.
You hear things about, I don't think there's actually a lot of damage in town, but you hear stories about the YHA, fire disconnected and went kind of rumbling across the floor and the flue popped off and stuff like that. But I don't think there was a lot of destruction.
Actually, Marianne, you said you were talking about the way the ground moves, and the one thing that I remember about that because there were a few earthquakes around that time, was how we got a lot of rolling.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much the sharp shaking, or it was more rolling.
Yeah, that can vary quite a lot.
Yeah,
you
you can see.
Yeah.
With the alpine fault, we expect it to be very long and rolling, rather than it's going to be very long and rolling, but go on for ages.
Yes, sounds
quite gentle and relaxing.
What are we working at?
Yeah, it's like rolling.
I was going to say the other thing about planning the smaller emergencies is that we can't plan for every event with the civil defence system that we deal with all the hazards around the district. So the system's designed that it is a system that can adapt to whatever emergency it is. For the bigger events, we want to have a specific plan. But even for this event, we're only aiming to plan for the first 12 or 24 hours, because everything after that is going to have to be tailored to actually the reality of what's happened. And they always say a plan only survives. It only survives until you have your first contact with the enemy, and then it all changes. So, so we're planning for the first sort of 12 to 24 hours with this plan.
I think I've got enough food for that.
I suppose, and the other thing too we have to be very mindful of is that we've got an entire district to respond to in these events. So obviously you're at the sharpie bit. We've just got to make sure we don't miss a trick on the balance of the district. But reality, we look at the priorities, and the priorities will be in the high country. So it would be fascinating. Any other questions you might have? Certainly Ryan's the key contact here with that, so make sure you do that. We've got if you're not on Salon Gets Ready, we'd encourage you to be on that. We've got a Salon Gets Ready Facebook page. I made the dramatic leap of that too, to go to join Facebook, so you can join their Facebook page, and we used it extensively. Well, we used it quite a bit during the flood last weekend. We talk about planning for events. must admit that when the flood came through the Selwyn River and we evacuated those huts, it was a bit different to what I'd experienced in my 20 years at council. We had to make things happen a little bit quicker than normal. So yeah, you've got to be able to react, and once we figured out what we had, we did. So yeah, so it's a in these events, it's a constant change. So.
Is anyone else who's on Selwyn Gets Ready? Selwyn Gets Ready is a system we've got at Selwyn Council, obviously, but it's a database of skills, resources, and needs. So we know who's got a generator up here if you register it, and the community response team can then print out that list when an emergency happens. They know where everything is in the community and who's got particular skills, like someone might be a nurse or a doctor or a plumber or whatever can be useful, because you've only got what you've got in your community if you're going to be isolated. So those sort of things would be really handy to know. So if you just Google Selwyn Gets Ready, you'll see it. It also has some other useful things for us. We can send out text and email alerts when severe weather's forecast and things like that. And you can also send in, if there's any internet or connectivity, you can also send in situation reports to us in the Emergency Operations Centre in Rolleston. So we'd really encourage everybody up here to be on Selwyn Gets Ready.
But a skill set like having people up here who speak Mandarin could be really useful. If there is anyone up here who speaks. But it's that type of thing when we've got tourists on the road that we just might need those people help out with that language barrier. So yeah.
Yeah, with Selwyn Gets Ready, it's really important for batch holders to be on that as well, not just locals.
Yeah.
And the batch holders are on better.
Yeah, we're just trying to put that all together. We're starting with trying to get all the names again of everybody who lives here and where their batches are. So we've been working with Dartwood, with Ryan, through the OPR Bus Association and then going out and making sure that we know where everybody lives, and so it's got some nice big maps from Selwyn on the village, and we can use those. So we started.
And you have got some really good skills. So for the people you've got living here, you've got an amazing little community. There's some incredible people here, so you're pretty lucky in that regard.
Right. Bob, was it that you want to say before we close up? A few, Alan, do you want to mention? All right. Nothing else? Last calls? Okay. Thanks very much. It looks like a round of applause for Mary. It was it's quite fascinating, those sort of reports. So hey, it was really, I really enjoyed it. It was easy listen. Very fascinating.
Hey, we want to thank you too, guys, for coming out, and especially coming out on Friday night, and coming up here. So thank you all, all the whole team, Bob coming up, and yeah, good to begin into that work. Get it all sorted. Thanks very much.
All right, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. Cheers. Use it.